Let's welcome Aidan Quilligan.
Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Aidan Quilligan, and I'm delighted to be here with you at PTC LiveWorx here in Boston this morning. Now, as has just been said, I lead an organization in Accenture called Industry X.0. And the first question I usually get asked when people meet me for the first time is, Aidan, what the heck is it with this X.0 thing? You know, the world is still getting its head around Industry 4.0. Most companies aren't there yet. What is it you're saying to the world with this concept of X.0? And the answer is actually quite simple, because we see Industry X.0 as bigger, more transformational, and more exciting than what a lot of people think about as, let's say, only Industry 4.0. So when we talk about it, we talk about what's happening below the line. So productivity improvements on the production lines, on the shop floor, in the mines, out on the oil rigs, also new experiences for workers. So a lot of good, valuable work happening in the existing operations. And then above the line is what we call innovation and growth, smart connected products, new business models. So very exciting stuff. And of course, the challenge for companies, most companies, is to do both at the same time, or what we call the WISE pivot. So how do you take your company from where it is today to where it's going to be in the future in this digital world that we heard about from Sudeep? And balance all of the elements of that equation while undertaking that journey. So a very challenging world that we live in. And those of you who are familiar with the PTC terminology will hear the smart connected products, the equivalent of what we call above the line, smart connected operations being what's below the line. So very, very similar terminology. And I'm here to talk about the single most exciting transformative piece of technology that is driving all of that, called artificial intelligence. And at Accenture, we see a number of keys to success in mastering AI and the possibilities of AI, but there's really one that I want to zoom in on during this 30 minutes, and that's about mindset. Because as with most things in life, having the right mindset means you are much more likely to find what it is that you are looking for than if you don't. Very, very simple. But as we talk about the mindset for AI, we need to undo what Hollywood has actually done over many years, because the classic Hollywood mindset is human versus machine. So think about 2001: A Space Odyssey. Think about Arnie and the Terminator series. It's usually human versus the machine, whereas we believe that the mindset you need here is human plus machine to see the real value and the opportunity that we have in this world of artificial intelligence. So let's talk a little bit about where we are today in the world of AI and robotics. So I've been at Accenture for over 30 years now, and I've never seen anything move as swiftly from, let's call it the laboratory, out into the real world. So we have gone well beyond hundreds of projects. We're now into thousands of projects in the world of AI, unlocking value for clients in the front, the middle, and the back offices of their companies. So it has really moved at very significant speed. And the manifestation of AI in the world that we live in is very often through robotics and many forms of robotics. So we can think about the industrial arms, the very classic understanding of robotics, arms that pick things up, move them around, put them down, things that twist things. Moving into cobots that are specially designed to work alongside humans, not bash us over the head, so specially equipped cobots. Then the mobile robots that go around warehouses, moving things from A to B. We've seen them all in the Amazon warehouses. And then more widely, the autonomous vehicles and drones that move around in unrestricted environments. And finally, exoskeletons, so robotic devices that literally empower the human body with superhuman powers to do particular activities in a particular way. So many, many ways in which AI and robotics are already coming into our world and helping humans. So machine plus human, these technologies are here to help, not to take our jobs or do us harm. So before I go any further, I'd like to step back a little bit on what we mean by AI. And of course, the center of AI is very much this concept of machine learning. So within machine learning, it is different to classic approaches. So the machine learns for itself, rather than humans programming the machine to tell it what to do. And within that, we see one of the recurring themes that happens within the world of AI. So the human has not gone away, but the role of the human has changed. So in the previous world, programming the machine versus in an AI world, feeding the machine with different data sets whereby it understands more about the environment that it operates within. And our definition of AI is the range of systems and technologies that can sense, comprehend, act, and learn. And then sitting around machine learning, we see a whole range of capabilities and on into a whole range of applications that makes AI and the universe of AI so powerful. But when you look at these words and take them in, you realize that, hang on a minute, that's what we do as humans. And that's also one of the very significant challenges of the world of AI, because it is. This is very similar to what you and I do in our day-to-day lives. And I sometimes think about AI as a new work colleague. And we all know work colleagues can be difficult to get to know at the start and work with. But AI is one of these work colleagues that I believe we will all have to get to understand how to get on with, because it is not going away anytime soon. Now, the predictions around AI, wow, these are very impressive. So trillions of dollars being added to global economies, billions of worker hours of productivity being saved. Very, very impressive predictions here. But they will not be realized through traditional approaches. Because traditional approaches of human versus machine will seek out opportunities for automation in the way the world works today, whereas the right mindset will look for opportunities to completely reinvent the business model and ultimately how the work is done. In the former case, it will lead to incremental improvements. There will be improvements, but they will be incremental and they will tail off, whereas the latter is going to define the innovators and the winners of the future. And let me give you an example of that. So some of you may be familiar with the company Stitch Fix, which is it's a clothing retail company with a very, very different business model. So rather than signing up for, oh, I want to buy this or I want to buy that, they take you through a style consultation where you simply tag things that you like. And that gets fed into an AI-powered system that then figures out some of what you might like to buy. It engages with a set of crowdsourced designers to, again, design clothing that the machine believes will fit your taste, and they come to you on a buy or return basis. So a very, very different way of thinking about how to figure out my preferences, what I'm going to buy. And of course, it's self-reinforcing. So the more of these things that I buy, the more the machine knows what my tastes actually are. So it's that kind of way of looking at the world, the business model in a different way is where we believe the real innovations and the power of AI are going to be found. Now, what I'd like to do is cover really three things in the remaining time that I have here. Firstly, talk about a number of myths around AI. Secondly, talk about the importance of this different mindset as we look at the future of work and the future workforce. And finally, talk about responsible AI, where we believe a very strong governance framework is required to make sure that the technology of AI is adopted and used for good in the world that we live in. So let me start with the first myth around AI. Robots are coming for us. They're evil. And this is very much one of the things you see in the Hollywood blockbusters, which is perhaps true in those movies. But there's nothing inherently anti-human in the technologies that we have in AI. As I said a minute ago, one of the reasons I think there's a particular fear factor is it does look and sound like and is similar to what we do as humans. So inevitably, there's a little bit more of a concern about this Pandora's box that perhaps we're opening up with AI technology. But let's remember that most technology developments in history, in fact, pretty much all of them, had the naysayers. So in the place that I live in the UK, we had the Luddites who were out destroying machinery because they wanted to hold back progress in the textiles industry. So it's a recurring theme of people being concerned about the impact of technology on the world that existed at that point in time. There's nothing new in this dynamic of people being concerned about what technology is going to do. A second myth is that machines are going to take our jobs and eradicate humans from the workplace. Well, this one does need particular attention because, firstly, there is an element of truth in this. There are many roles out there that are repetitive, low skill, open to automation, and ultimately will be replaced by robotic and artificial intelligence technologies. But studies have repeatedly shown that humans don't actually like doing that kind of work. So picture the scene. Honey, how was your day at work today? Oh, I felt like a robot at work. Well, guess what? Why don't we let the robot do the robot things and move that worker on to do something more interesting? Now, of course, there's an if there that I'm going to come back to in a minute, right? If we can move that worker, then it would be a win-win. And then secondly, we have a growing need for work in our world. So here in the US, if we just take one example, the predictions are that in order to deal with the baby boomer retirement plans, there will be 3.4 million more jobs needed in the manufacturing sector. So on a like-for-like basis, we see continuing needs in our world for more work to get done. And then thirdly, there is, of course, the jobs created by the artificial intelligence technology itself. So we have seen over the last decade or so, whole new industries spring up around the smartphones and the apps. So new roles around embedded software, app design, experience design, gaming, roles that we could not properly articulate 10 years ago are actually very, very prevalent in the world that we live in today. So the bottom line is, we believe there will be a net increase in jobs. And predictions vary, but Gartner predict that in 2020, there will be somewhere around 1.8 million jobs created as a result of AI, and about 1.3 million jobs lost as a result of AI. So again, a net increase. But to go back to the if that I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, there is a critical skills gap that needs to be filled in order for all of this to play out. Again, here in the US, right now, there are more job openings than there are people looking for employment, both at about 6-point-something million. Now, clearly, there's many elements within that equation. It's not one for one. but one of those critical elements is the skills gap. So there's a lot to be done in corporations, in governments. Ultimately, it will be a significant social challenge to close the skills gap and have people equipped for these new roles that will be opening up and being able to adapt in the world of artificial intelligence. And then the third myth here is that the previous approaches that we have used and have served us well in the past are still going to work in the world that we're moving into. Now, many of us in this room have been at the forefront of technology over the last number of decades, building, designing, implementing, unlocking value from technology, and we've got pretty good at it. And of course, PTC and Jim persuaded Rockwell to stump up $1 billion into PTC, right? So those guys are pretty good. But within that, there's also a reality that a lot of the techniques that have worked in the past, waterfall methods, are not going to work again in the world that we're moving into. We will need to rely on more experimentation, more trial and error. And this is another one of the keys to success that we see in really getting the value out of AI. And some of these cultures, disciplines are very much contrary to the way companies are set up today, and indeed the performance management of those kind of companies. So a lot to do to change the mindset, move into more experimentation, which of course is also how machines very often learn for themselves. So for example, in Japan, a company called Fanuc that does robotic equipment, the way that they teach the machines is through deep reinforcement learning. They give the machines images of what a good outcome looks like, and the machines figure out for themselves through trial and error and reinforcement how to go about doing that. So very different approaches, very different mindset to the world that we have experienced in the past. So now let's think about the future of work and the workforce that we need in that kind of a world. Especially in Industry X.0 as we call it. And let's start with way back in the early 1900s when the very first production or assembly lines were being put together. So this was one of the keys to the productivity improvements, especially in the automotive industry. So the Ford Motor Company, the Model T, one of the breakthroughs there was having an assembly line that had very well-defined sequential steps for manufacturing the Model T Ford at scale. So rumor has it that it was actually a guy called Klaas who brought the concept back into the factory, having been to what he called a disassembly station, because he actually visited a slaughterhouse and realized that there was a very well-defined way of going through that process, and said, well, what if we did it in reverse for the Model T? So each of these steps and the regimented way of production meant that the time to produce a Model T came down to something around 93 minutes. And as an interesting aside, people actually got paid more as the company got more efficient and more productive in producing the cars. So a case where the workers also benefited from the new technology. And then building on these assembly and production lines, in the 70s and the 80s, what's commonly discussed as the third industrial revolution, the arrival of new technology, automation, business process re-engineering. Some of us may have been around doing that back then, but still a very predefined sequential set of steps in a relatively rigid fashion. And now the third era that we are in now is adaptive processes. So processes that are responding in real time to stimulus from the market, stimulus from what's happening in the operations in real time, right? So those of us who've been coming here for years or work with PTC and similar companies will understand the importance of the digital twin, because the data is the fuel for how the AI and how these processes can respond, and they are critical enablers to make all of this work. But the way I also think about this is two products owned by Google. So Google Maps and Waze. So how many Wazers have we got here? Do people understand what Waze is? Yeah, good, quite a lot of Wazers. I'm a bit upset because I was one of the early ones, so there's too many people on Waze these days for my liking because everybody takes my shortcuts now. But for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, Google Maps is a static representation of digitized map information on a variety of displays, very useful in its own right. But of course, it's static, and when I try to undertake a journey, it may or may not correspond to what I'm seeing in Google Maps. Move over to the world of Waze, crowdsource real-time information feeding in that helps me as I try to get from A to B. So much more useful, a much greater platform for value-added services, and ultimately representing the kind of adaptive processes that we need to see in operations, both to drive up efficiency levels as well as to be responsive to customer needs. Now, as we think about new approaches to work, I want to introduce a concept that we think is really important called the missing middle. Now, the missing middle is not missing because we've lost it. It's missing because we haven't really defined and articulated it just yet. And what I mean by the missing middle is, typically, we have humans over here doing the human things that humans are good at. So we design things, we're very creative, we lead, we do all of that on our own. At the other extreme, we have machines doing the machine things. So they're doing the automated, repetitive things. But what happens in between those two? And this missing middle is where we believe we will see a lot of the new jobs, and we will see a lot of the real innovations in the world of artificial intelligence. So situations where the machines help humans to be better, and humans help the machines to be better. So if we take the humans helping machines, we're all familiar with virtual assistants and Alexa, we've got Apex. Those machines need to be trained how to deal with situations, including situations where they don't actually know what to do. Increasingly, these assistants embody the cultures and almost the personality of the company that you're dealing with and the brand values. So you could imagine a quirky, edgy type of engagement with a media company and maybe a more traditional dialogue with a banking company. So all of that is a new field where humans have to train the machines to be able to do this. And on the other side, the machines can help humans. So at Autodesk, when they set about designing drones, they put the initial parameters into an AI-powered engine that trawls through a myriad of previous designs and gives the human designer a set of designs to start from. So the designer doesn't have to go through all of that effort. They can then go straight into fine-tuning the final design in line with the customer needs and come up with the optimal design that a human designer is going to be able to do better than the machine is going to be able to do. So this missing middle is where we think we will see a lot more of human plus machine. And then finally, the real magic is going to occur when we find the humans and the machines working together, especially on the shop floor. Okay, so we have seen historically some industries, some companies have previously driven Industry 4 type O levels of automation up very, very highly. So in Germany, a number of these automotive companies have gone to kind of 90% of automation. But what they were finding is, in common with the rest of the auto industry, that profitability is to be found where you have options on cars, or even unique cars that are not straight off the production lines. So in order to introduce that kind of flexibility, they actually drop down the levels of automation. So moving it down from about 90-10, more like 50-50, a much more productive, successful mode of humans and machines working together. And there will be much more to come on this because, of course, the technology at the moment is still fairly early days in terms of how humans and robots interact with each other. A lot of effort going into making the engagement closer to the engagement that we're having at the moment, more natural language, natural gesture type work. And before I close, I'd like to say a few words on what we believe is a critical enabler for all of this around responsible AI. We have all seen in recent times what's happened with data privacy, which of course generates not only issues for the companies involved and the people involved at that time, but it also causes the whole premise, in this case of social media, to be questioned. And people then begin to think about, well, is that really what I signed up for? Do I want to be part of this phenomenon? And creates a backlash against the technology. So because of the importance of AI, we believe that that must be treated in a much more forward-looking, much more thoughtful, much more comprehensive set of frameworks that we put in place ahead, or at least hand in hand with the arrival of the technology, rather than trying to retrofit it later on when some of these issues may be pretty deep-rooted. So principles like accountability, transparency, honesty, fairness, and being human-centric. And to give you an example, some jurisdictions are already beginning to use AI to come up with sentences. Now, I can think of no better example where I would really like to understand how that works. And of course, AI, very often, you don't actually know because it's black box, the machine has learned. So there is no audit trail back into how that came about. But there will be cases like judicial sentencing where that kind of approach is just not going to be appropriate. So we're working with government bodies, and corporations to work through what are these kind of governance issues that we can avoid, or at least limit the adoption issues and alleviate some of the concerns that we're seeing with the future adoption of AI. So in closing, our CTO, a guy called Paul Doherty, has written a book, not surprisingly called Human Plus Machine. It gives many practical examples that I haven't had the time to cover in these 30 minutes. The proceeds do not go to Paul, they don't go to me, they don't go to Accenture, they actually go to organizations that are charged with closing this skills gap that I mentioned earlier. So very good causes and a very practical handbook for how to take some of these concepts into your everyday lives. What I'd like to leave you with is really 3 points. Firstly, that the mindset that you approach this whole challenge around AI with is critically important, because if you look for only the automation opportunities, then that is what you will find. Whereas if you think more broadly around how to reimagine how the work is done, there will be more innovation, more opportunities to be found. Second concept of the missing middle. So this is where machines will help humans and humans will help machines to do things better. It's where we will find the new jobs, it's where we will find the new innovations that AI is going to bring. And finally, I really think Hollywood is wrong. This is not about human versus machine. It's very much about human plus machine in order to realize the value and the potential of artificial intelligence. So, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of LiveWorx.